My name is Matthew Medina. I'm a content designer here at ArenaNet. We're going to be talking today about the creation of Lion's Arch and how it's changed over the course since we launched to today. We're not going to be talking about future content, so hate to disappoint you, but we can't answer questions about that today. I am a content designer, which means that for Lion's Arch in particular, I was the person who spawned all of the NPCs in the city that you saw before Scarlet came in and wrecked it all, unfortunately. So we're going to talk about that, the process of creating the map from start to finish.
Yeah, and I'm Josh Foreman, and I do build the environments mostly, and other weird stuff here and there. So we've both been here a long time. I feel like
Yes.
I'm over 10 years. I mean, specifically in this room, I've been here for 10 years. How long have you been?
I had my 11th
11th,
this
yeah.
year, so yeah.
Jeez. Yeah, so we actually both worked on the original Lion's Arch for Guild Wars 1 as
Yeah.
well. So we've got kind of a broad picture of kind of how the whole mythos of Lion's Arch evolved and emerged. So.
Yeah, and that was actually really fun because both of us worked on both iterations of the city, so it was really cool to kind of revisit some of the things that we did in the past. In Guild Wars Prophecies, I was an environment artist, and so in this one I was able to kind of take a different role and kind of spot out some of the things that I had built, some things that Josh had built, and so I just really enjoy being able to take it from 250 years ago at Prophecies to today. That's one of the things I love to talk about today. So,
As a side note, we both have the ArenaNet plague that's going around, so excuse our throat clearing and constant drinking.
yes, we apologize. I guess we can start with kind of covering a little bit about Guild Wars 1 version of Lion's Arch,
Yeah.
just kind of as a primer. Even in Prophecies, it went through a lot of changes. I think it used to be called Hakewood.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
I think that's the original map name in our
Yeah,
development.
yeah, and then at some point we redubbed it Lion's Arch. But we always wanted this place to be a sort of a central hub for players to kind of gather and do those things that, MMOs are really good about, like socialization and crafting and, just kind of gathering everybody together.
Why do you think we put it in a tropical location?
I've always wanted to know, like, what... Krita was always so beautiful, and I'm not sure that I really have a good answer for that, because Lion's Arch,
It was pretty much just in the middle of the world, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of how it ended up there.
Yeah, that's probably where that came from, but as far as why we picked the tropical location for that, I'm not exactly sure.
It's fun, though. It's fun to take not standard fantasy trope and put our fantasy stamp on it. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that kind of made it a unique kind of central hub party destination.
Yeah, and it might have had something to do too with when we started building Guild Wars 1, we built some of the early stage levels. We built actually the scorched version of Ascalon, and we actually got some feedback on that it was kind of bleak to start the game in that environment, and that's one of the reasons why we went back and did pre-searing. And so I think Lion's Arch and Krita in particular was sort of a nice sort of turn, because you went through this very bleak, burnt atmosphere, and then you kind of trudged through the treacherous mountains, and then you kind of came out into this beautiful sort of tropical area. And I think maybe that's why that kind of settled into, like, it was a nice resting place for players.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So do we want to get into the lore a little bit behind Lion's Arch? Like, where did it come from? Why did it exist?
I would, except I'm not the expert on the team when it comes to lore for Guild Wars 1. I've kind of taken that role on a little bit more since I moved to the design team, but some of the Lion's Arch lore, we delved into a little bit in Guild Wars 2. But, of course, Guild Wars 2 Lion's Arch was very different in that it was a complete reboot in a way, because Zaitan, when Zaitan rose and ore came up, it basically wiped out the old city. So a lot of the lore in itself was kind of lost, where the Lion Guard had to change, their function and their disciplines, and so I know a lot more about the GW2 style lore for Lion's Arch. Not so much about GW1, unfortunately.
Well, considering the vast majority of people are here for Guild Wars 2,
Yes.
start talking about the lore for that.
All right. So yeah, I mean, of course, as I said, the Lion's Arch was sort of a casualty of the Elder Dragon's Rising. When ore was risen by Zaitan, the waves just came in and they completely wiped out Lion's Arch, and it was gone. It was wiped off the face of the map, and then some of the waters receded, and Kobaya Mariner came in with his crew and sort of gathered all of the people together, unified them, and resettled the city in effect.
From a production standpoint, I'm trying to remember if it was the visuals of all the wrecked up ships making houses that kind of drove the story that way, or if it was the story that got the concept artist going that direction.
So I think that was a case where the story kind of drove that direction, because initially Lion's Arch was initially designed as a hub city, and in a lot of ways Divinity's Reach sort of became that instead. Lion's Arch initially was designed to be like, here's the Ascalon quadrant, and here's the Crichton quadrant, and here's the Char quadrant. But then we ended up doing Divinity's Reach in the same style, and we really didn't think it would be cool to have two cities with pretty much the same sort of layout. And the original concept also had a bunch of islands, like with kind of connections between the two. And so we decided to take it in a different direction, and that's sort of where the idea of when the waters receded, there'd be a lot of washed up ships and shipwrecks, and basically the pirates moved in and rebuilt the city using whatever was available at hand, which was a lot of shipwrecks.
Yeah, that made it a really interesting, unique kind of environment to design and build out. It was really fun just kind of cobbling stuff together and thinking, how would people live in a place like this? What could they do with these resources and stuff? So I got the map probably, I want to say it was a year and a half before we launched. The way we did a lot of our maps was we would have our concept map art. We start with concept art, which is these just crazy paintings of massive things. And then we had a kind of an intermediate team that would go in and build really sloppy, fast props, just pound them out, get them in there, establish a look and a feel. And so they kind of fleshed out that middle area. And then I got the map, and so it was 10% this downtown area.
Yeah.
And they were like, just fill it up with whatever. So that was just a really fun opportunity to just let the imagination loose. So me and Matthew worked together a lot on just talking about what kind of things go on in this town, why does this exist, where would people be living and why, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's one of those interesting things that happened, where because there was somewhat of a shift in design, there was a lot of things that were done previous to the redesign that we didn't want to lose. So there was a lot of like idle scenes and conversations and talk, and that we had initially thought we would do for this hub vision of Lion's Arch. But since we weren't going to do the hub vision anymore, it was a matter of us picking and choosing what worked and what didn't. One of the things that I think was the kind of the sole survivor of the original vision was the idea of the pub crawl. Some of our players have found that there was a group of partiers who every night they would start in one bar and they would go from bar to bar to bar across the entire city and end up right back where they started. But that's one of those things that initially it was designed to be like they would go to the Char bar, they would go to the Silvari bar, the Nectar bar, and each area would have its own sort of flavor. And I think we were able to maintain most of that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think I built one bar in there, was it the Crow's Nest? One of those. And and Matthew said, "Oh, we've got this whole pub crawl thing. You got to make 5 bars." So that sounds like a fun challenge. So I just found all sorts of little nooks and crannies to stick them in and try to theme them in interesting ways. So that was fun. So one of the things that when you're approaching a map that is a known location from the previous game, like Guild Wars 1, you want to show the underwater shot. How do we lay this out in a way that that makes sense, that pays the proper homage and respect to the previous work, but then is something new and unique and interesting to new people. So this idea of putting the Sunken Lion's Arch, I thought was a really clever way to do that, where you really feel like you're going down into the past to explore these ruins, and that was a fun thing.
Yeah, and it was a challenge for us too, in that although there were obviously some geological changes whenever something massive like an elder dragon rises, we definitely are going to expect some amount of shifting of things around. But we also want it to be familiar to players who are coming from GW1 into GW2 to be able to say, "Oh wow, I remember where this was," and we didn't always have the same prop set because our tools were completely different back in GW1, and so we couldn't just bring everything straight across. And even if we did, we would have to update it anyway because the graphics quality of GW1 was a certain standard, and GW2 was sort of pushing the envelope on that. So trying to figure out so we took the sort of the most iconic visions like the lighthouse and the statue underwater there, and we made that sort of the focal point and made sure that those were in the right spots so that players could connect the dots and be like, yeah, this is the same place. It's just it's been radically changed by the rise of the Elder Dragon.
Yeah. So other just random fun stuff. The diving board, for instance. So this was something that I'd been petitioning to get in the game for years, just because it's such a weird random thing. So I kept being told, it's pretty far down on the list of things to do. Rightfully so. There's more important systems that you got to get solidified. But so since I had this 90% of a map to fill up with stuff, I thought, let's make the most epic diving board that has ever existed. And so I just built that thing. And do you know which someone went in and said, that thing's so awesome, I have to put
that's exactly what it was. Matt Pennebaker, who's one of our, he was a system designer at the time, I believe.
Right.
I mean, we see stuff like that goes into the game, and us as designers are like, well, this is too cool not to do anything with. So Matt basically took that and was like, I'm going to build diving goggles because we have to have diving goggles if we're going to do a diving board. And so he built the skills for the diving goggles and he put it up there, and as soon as it went in the game, everyone was like, yes, we're doing this everywhere we can because it's just fun. It's just cool.
It's a great example of just the interaction between the departments where we inspire each other constantly. We'll get design input or a new system or whatever, and we're like, oh, let's find all the cool ways we can take advantage of that. So, I'm going to show the mini pet arena. Now, mini pets is not a thing, obviously, but when we're designing these areas, we're told, we're not told. We all kind of know as a company, there's certain things we're going to want to do eventually at some point. And so this was my idea, was to just do this hilarious visual pun, if you think puns are hilarious, to cast the shadow of a net over a real arena. But those kind of things we're just always toying with, right? And because an MMO is a very living, breathing entity, you're always kind of anticipating what could come. It's not necessarily going to come. You're always wanting to reach back into the past to like Underwater Lion's Arch and that kind of stuff. And so it's I guess my whole point with it is developing this kind of a game is so unique from other kinds of games and any other kind of media because the time is so nebulous. You know what I mean? Like you're always thinking ahead and you're always thinking behind. I guess is the point of that.
Yeah, and this was one of those things that was just, it was just a fun thing to put in there, and it seemed to make sense for us to have, kind of a little bit of a, almost self-referential without being so far off the line that it's out of scope or out of context. And I love hanging out there, and I've even seen some fan events when we've had like Living World content. I've seen people come over there and they're having like. I saw a costume contest for one of the holidays, and it took place in that arena, and it was just like we totally didn't expect that to be the use for it, but great. I mean, it's awesome that our fans are finding things to do in these things that we put into the game.
Yeah.
That we don't intend.
I mean, that's what's fun about working on an MMO is there's constant feedback loop going on between the fans and the developers, and so that's really cool. I mean, personally, as someone who, like, the reason I'm in games is to create fun experiences for people to actually get that real-time feedback. That's what we all love about it. So
yeah, that's
another example of this kind of thing was we had a designer who wanted to do Mower Racing. This was before launch, so I think I put that Mower Racing track in, I want to say, a week before we launched.
Yeah.
And they never got to it until eventually in Living Story we had a chance, and so that was like great.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, anytime we can sort of front things that we think we're going to do, we try our best to pay all those out because it's all work that we want to go into the game, and especially with a map, with the things that we have, we don't like to throw people into having to re-download a map every time or check the delta of the map every time we do a build. We want to try to preload as much content that
and it gives us a sense of reality to the world, that the denizens of this world are building things for reasons.
Yes.
Things just don't appear. I mean, you can't always avoid that, but
yeah,
as much as we can. And let's see, this is a reminder that we will answer all of your questions. Not all of them, sorry, some of them at the end. And again, we can't answer anything about the future of Lion's Arch. So, what else do we have to talk about? Let's talk about the troll puzzle. I want to talk about stuff that we do wrong from time to time.
Yes.
I love talking about doing things wrong. So, the Troll's End puzzle, right? This idea that you'd find a secret Mario pipe and you go down and you go through these winding caves to find the end. So that was super fun to me. When we started doing jumping puzzles in all the maps, it became a challenge to think, okay, what makes this one different than other ones?
Right.
And I enjoy doing spelunking. I spelunk around Mount St. Helens. There's these cool caves called the Ape Caves and stuff. So I have a sense for what it's like to be in a claustrophobic, tight space and maneuvering in weird, awkward ways. And for some reason, I thought, we should try to get that into the game. And and it actually worked pretty decent for a while. And then we had to change some things about the way the camera worked.
Yeah.
It's just before we launched, the camera worked different, and it became the worst experience ever, and it's the worst jumping puzzle ever, and I just wanted to apologize to everyone who's ever done that jumping puzzle. It's gone through several iterations where I was trying to massage it and work it and fix things, but it's one of those things where it takes place in these tube props, and you can't go in and just change props. There's hundreds of versions of them throughout the world, so I couldn't just break out a wall and make it bigger and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just another example of this is, we're experimenting, we're always trying to find fun and interesting things, but we're also very aware, like, when we don't quite hit that mark and how to do it better next time. So.
Yeah, and that also presented challenges. I mean, some of our jumping puzzles require us to do some design work, and some of them don't. This was one of the light ones, which is probably for the best, because we didn't want to necessarily have that bad experience if there was a lot of like tripwires that you had to fire. And I remember getting in there and seeing the same problems that Josh was seeing, and thinking it's a really good thing that we didn't try to put anything in here of substance, because it would have probably been an even worse experience. And so, sometimes things just, development, the changing nature of the way that we do our cycles, sometimes these things happen and it's out of our hands, and we just have to try to make the best of what we have. And, that's one of those cases where it didn't turn out exactly the way we wanted it to.
So speaking of a lot of content in a jumping puzzle, let's talk
Oh,
about
yes.
Wayant's Revenge. So I think this may have been one of the last jumping puzzles I worked on before launch. I've done a lot of them since. But so I knew that Lion's Arch was going to be a place where a lot of people came together, and I wanted to put something there that could kind of be the introduction to jumping puzzles in a way. In my mind, I kept the refrain, it's the Disneyland of jumping puzzles.
Yeah.
So I wanted it to be heavily thematic, not incredibly difficult, not super punishing. You know, some of those jumping puzzles, you fall down and you have to start all the way back at the beginning. And, now, there was a technical glitch at the beginning, and I guess it popped up again, and hopefully it got fixed. I don't know. But that initial slide down the shark's maw
Oh, yeah.
would just randomly kill you. Thanks, physics. Anyway, so the idea of doing this in my mind, it was like if Disney died right after he finished building Disneyland, and then he was a drunken ghost guiding you through a dilapidated, non-functioning Disneyland. That's kind of the vibe I was going for. So we came up with this pirate idea and got to write lots of funny, quirky dialogue in it.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I liked about this jumping puzzle more than the other ones that I've worked on is it was narrated. You know, you had a character who was basically walking you through it and taunting you along the way. And I just really loved having that set up. It took quite a bit of finagling to get the talk lines to play correctly and to make sure that, because it was a disembodied voice, and the way that our system works is really difficult to have a disembodied voice telling you things. So we had to get that just right, and the timing of like when you hit parts of the jumping puzzle, we had to make sure that you were in the right place, so he was narrating the right thing.
And it's super tricky because anyone could be anywhere in that cave at any time.
Right, it was an open world.
There could be 100 people, spaced out every 5 feet, and so like in my mind when I'm designing it, I'm thinking about one person going through this experience. And then I'm like, hey, Matthew, let's do all this stuff. And he's like, there could be anyone anywhere at any time.
Yeah, and in particular, the thing that gave me the most challenge in this jumping puzzle was the light room. It's still probably not what I would like it to have been, just because, again, it's this trick of, okay, one guy goes into the room, triggers all the lights to turn on and off. What happens when the next guy comes on behind you? And then when the other guy leaves, what state is the room in at any one time is so difficult for us to track sometimes that it became sort of a give and take of like, well, this is not the optimal solution, it's not the ideal thing to do, but it's the one that makes the most sense for a large group of players coming in together. And hopefully it works in all as many cases as possible, not all cases, but that's sort of the thing that we try to strive for, is making sure that everybody can enjoy the content together and not exclusive to one or another.
Should we talk about the Pirate Cave?
Sure.
So here's another just fill space. So what do we do? So we thought about, this is a pirate town. What are pirates known for? There's the classic black market. It's just a cool thing. So, and I'd always wanted dripped limestone caves. We never had them, so I just went and I sculpted 20 awesome drips. and so this was my fill up a cave with this stuff, and pirate booty. So this was a really fun area to kind of fill out visually. And then kind of, you want to talk about it from a design perspective? So
this one, I'm pretty sure was not on the list of things that we initially wanted to do. But I think you and I had a conversation where it's like, how are we going to have a pirate city if we don't have something that looks like it's pirate, And we didn't necessarily want to build a big, pirate, Tortuga type of vibe. Because the city was, although it was settled by pirates, it had kind of settled into the Lion Guard are there. They're sort of policing. So it's not like a lawless place. It definitely has things, but there's still that element of there's a little shadiness going on. There's a black market in the background. We had another spot too, which I think never made ship, where there was sort of over by the Poster and Ward, there's a little farmhouse. And I think there's a personal story that takes place in there. I think that's one of the reasons why we pulled it out. But I initially built it so that you could like knock on the door and it would lead you underneath, and there was like this sort of underground like animal fighting ring, which never got, I think we probably would have run afoul of the ESRB. I don't know. I'm not sure what the ratings are for that.
There's something going on there.
Yeah.
I built all those cages and stuff for exotic animals of some sort.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, getting back to the pirate caves, we really loved that idea that, there's going to be this sort of, it's a little bit, I don't want to say Pirates of the Caribbean, but, it does have that sort of vibe of like, you're in the back where all the pirates are keeping their hoard of gold and stolen stuff, and, they're just selling it back and forth, trading from each other, smuggling, bringing in new stuff. I just thought it was brilliant and beautiful the way that Josh did the treatment for it. So.
Thanks. Speaking of beautiful and brilliant, let's talk about the fountain. This is my favorite. So, again, this was kind of late in the process. And, what I remember about Guild Wars 1 was everyone would gather around the fountain, and there would be all these cool events and that kind of stuff. So I wanted some iconic thing, and we didn't have the schedule for it, so I just spent my own time in ZBrush tooling away for hours on end making this ridiculous lion statue. And one of the things, the reason I want to talk about it is specifically to talk about visual storytelling, which, you can impart story in a game through many ways, through cutscenes and through dialogues with NPCs and that kind of stuff, and all that stuff has its place. But my favorite is visual storytelling through the environment. So, I talked to the writers and tried to get a really good feel for what do the denizens of this town, how do they perceive themselves? What is their self-identity? And so again, liking visual puns, I started with a literal lion in a literal arch. But going from there, I put it on top of a globe, which was to symbolize the way that they felt that they dominated the earth. And specifically the way they dominate Tyria is through trade. And so that's why all those little boats circle around it is to show that. And so hopefully, when a player first comes into the city and they see this thing, they get a good sense for, these people are proud, they feel like they own the place, and there's some justification for that. So.
Yeah, and when we saw the first cut of the prop, our immediate reaction on the design side was, this is just awesome, and we don't really need to do anything here because it's, like you said, it's visual storytelling. It tells everything that we would want to convey about the city. The only request I think we had was, and this is probably just me because I, designed the Crichton alphabet, that I was like, well, it should have a slogan. So we came up with a slogan. I worked with Jeff Grubb, and we came up with the slogan, "From ruin, we prosper." And, it was just, we loved the sort of double entendre meaning of that, which is they're prospering from ruin, but they're also rising out of the ruins to prosper. So it's just one of those really cool sort of visual things that I think stands on its own and doesn't need like a lot of, lore explanations or conversations around, the fountain describing what it is, because it just speaks for itself. It's really cool.
Especially the fish.
Yes.
No one understands the fish. I don't even understand the fish.
Well,
I just thought they were silly and fun.
Yeah, but how many times do we go around and see those sorts of fountains bouncing water back and forth? It's just cute.
Just as a side note, I believe there are 4,000 frames of animation that I had to meticulously track to give to the audio team to do the sound effects.
Yeah, I'm sure they loved you after that.
Yes. Okay, let's answer some questions.
Sure, let's go for it.
Jedi Minds Rix or Dingle says, seeing as how the Lion's Arch in Guild Wars 1 is underwater, in Guild Wars 2, how do you feel about destroying your creation twice over now? So, that's never fun in one sense. The way I look at it is, like, people who build miniatures for movies, that's still a thing that sometimes happens.
Yeah.
Here's a building, and it's rigged with explosives specifically to blow up. So, they're building it from the beginning knowing the reason I'm building this is to have some giant cool spectacle. Now, granted, we didn't know that when we were building Lion's Arch.
No, although I was one of the principal designers for the Lost Shores event, which happened, just a few months after ship. And one of the first things we did when we had shipped, I mean, even before we shipped, we were starting to have the brainstorm meetings. And the number one thing that kept coming up in the meetings was, we've got to destroy Lion's Arch. And it was sort of like, well, we can't do that. The game just shipped. And, we had a bunch of people who, we had to funnel through the city and establish the city. So we did decide on doing the Lion's Arch attack, but we really kind of condensed it into a very specific portion of Lion's Arch that didn't have a lot of gameplay impact. In hindsight, I think the Scarlet thing that we did to end the Living World season was kind of the scope of what we wanted to do. But there's sort of like a nice poetic irony in the fact that, our post-launch content started with an attack on Lion's Arch and ended with an attack on Lion's Arch.
I hadn't thought of that, but there's bookends there.
Yeah.
Huh. Here's another question. How many iterations did you have to go through to finalize LA? Thanks, Drago the Wise, for that question.
On the content side, I would say 2, because we definitely did some amount of design work for, like I said, the hub concept of the city. And then when I took over on it, I kind of got the same map that you did, which was, there was a downtown core and everything else was pretty much just empty and blank. So it was up to us, I think, at that point to kind of fill it in and build all of the spawns and all of the props that went into it. So I would say the first iteration was sort of the high level design, and then the second iteration was actually executing and taking what the prop and map artist built.
Depends on how you define iteration. Because,
that's true too.
There's constant. We're still iterating, right?
Yes, that's true.
Priest Tooley wants to know, why is Lion's Arch named Lion's Arch? Uh-oh. You have a better chance of knowing this than I.
I'm going to have to go back and think that we had a writer on staff for Prophecies named Jeff Slabo, and I'm pretty sure he came up with that name.
Yeah.
Lion's Arch went through a lot of names. Like I said, I think the first name was Hakewood. I think it went through a couple of more before Lion's Arch, I think, we settled on just because it was the one that got the most consensus. We really couldn't come up with a name that everybody loved, and I think Lion's Arch was sort of the one that everyone settled on. It was like, yeah, this sounds good enough.
The compromise.
Yeah. We knew that we were, the lion was definitely the symbol of, sort of the Crichton kingdom at the time. There was a lot of sort of visual puns around lions. But yeah, as to why that name, I think it's just...
lost to the annals of time.
Yes.
All right, you read the next one.
Chaba Tong Nu, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, was the lion statue made by the great-great-great-great-grandson of Malcor by chance?
Why not?
Sure.
I made Malcor's Leap, so... Sure.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's canon. Done.
Yeah, well, we'll have to go talk to Scott and Angel about that one. I don't know. Oh. All right, so let's move on to the next one, because I don't know, actually.
Captain Muskie, were there any plans to facilitate the destruction of LA? Do you get attached to your maps? Oh. Wait, I'm missing things. Sorry, okay. Were there any places on pre-nuked LA that you didn't think were ever found? No, everyone found everything. I was disappointed by that. They found it really fast.
Yeah, that's one of those things. Like we had talked a lot about putting these little nooks and crannies everywhere. And I mean, Josh gave me a really big list of here's this really cool little nook. Let's put something here. And I didn't even get to all of them because there were so many different little things. But yeah, within
love my nooks.
A few hours, I think players had found all of the secrets.
Yeah, pretty much. Let's see.
You guys are too good.
Pseudo shot. How many hidden coins are really around? Yeah, I literally have no idea. I don't. It's not more than 5 or 10. I kind of started doing that later in the process. A lot of it came down to the last month or so. There's a lot of testing where players are just trying to break out of the map, and so there's all these interesting little ways that I never considered that you could get to, places you could get to that would get off the map. So I would block that off, but then I'd still leave a good section of the trail getting up there, and just put a little coin that was like, hey, that's good job, you're clever, sort of thing.
Yeah, it kind of became your signature for your maps, didn't it?
Quite literally,
Yeah.
it is my signature on the coin. It's actually, if you look at your mini map when you go through Wayne's Revenge, when you go through that maze, that's also my signature.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Little JCF there. Okay, so let me explain what those coins are. They're literally just a little golden coin that just has a little JCF insignia on it. I had to make. I was building a pirate-themed PvP map, and we needed gold coins to sprinkle on the ground on a sunken treasure chest. And so I made 4 or 5 different variants of coins, and my little logo insignia looked like it would fit really well. So I just had that. And at some point, I was just like, oh, I'll just put that in this little spot, because we can't really put content there. It doesn't make sense, but I'll just put that just as a little good job to the player.
All right, Captain Muskie, was it emotionally tough to facilitate the destruction of LA? Do you get attached to your maps? Content-wise, yes. I definitely had mixed feelings about, when it was brought up that, we're going to destroy the city. We're actually going to remove it from the game as a city. That was definitely one of those I was like, I don't know if I feel really good about that. But at the same time, when we read through the story and we realize, this is something that needs to be part of the narrative, I think it makes it feel like, if we're emotional about it, then I think our players will be emotional about it, and there's no downside to that, in my opinion, as a storyteller. I love engaging with our players on an emotional level, and so if I can feel the same loss that you guys do over something that we've built, then I think that we've succeeded in what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's very well put.
Yeah.
I mean, it sucks to me because a lot of times I'll run into people that haven't played Guild Wars 2 before, and they're thinking about playing it, and they'll say, tell me a place you worked on. And the first place I would always talk about is Line, and now I can't, because it's pretty much a smoldering wreck. But yeah, what he said, mostly. It's when it's in service to something greater that really makes the world feel alive and gives some tension to your experience in the world, so it's not just one big bland experience. Yeah, I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah, and I think it did serve the larger overall story of Scarlet and making players, I don't know. There was definitely some mixed feelings about Scarlet on the forums and in our community, and we all saw, I think it slightly differently because we have a different sort of perspective on it. But I think that her giving her that sort of destruction of something that was near and dear to most of our player base, I think really kind of solidified the finale of that story. Yeah,
and I'd say also from an I don't know, artistic perspective, it's like a good TV show like Lost or something like that, Battlestar Galactica, where you take a beloved character and you kill him off at some point. That's establishing a precedent that says, look, just because you like this guy doesn't mean he's sticking around, and so that does create some tension and does make people more invested in the story that way. So.
Yeah, and we definitely don't want to ever feel like anything is off the table or safe. I think, we want to be able to have the narrative sort of flexibility to tell the story that we want to tell. And that seemed like the right thing to do for our story.
And I mean, establishing that precedence not only for fans but also for us as developers that we don't hold anything sacred, and there's the larger experience that everything else is subject to.
Yes. We have a question. I'm not sure I'll understand this. Zest Beer, why did the fountain move? the Lion moved a few times. I mean, we definitely moved that out when there was content that needed. I think the first time it moved was for Dragon Bash, specifically to bring in the sort of holographic projector.
Well, here's I think specifically what happened
Okay.
is I think I scaled the prop a certain amount
Yeah.
and had it rotate a certain way, and then Halloween came, we destroyed
That's
it.
right. We
And
destroyed it
when
first.
I don't think we had access to the original map exactly, so I kind of had to eyeball it.
Okay.
So
Got it.
yeah, so if it changes a couple degrees here and there, that's wise because yeah, it's not a precise science yet. We're getting there.
Yeah.
Let's see. Alien Fear Gas says, what was the purpose of all the not so really working as surrogates that are now completely destroyed? Well, going back to the mini pet arena and the Mower Racing track and stuff, is we're always just thinking ahead and trying to be as flexible for any new content that comes our way. So that was always an idea that as new continents come and go or whatever, there's a spot for them.
Yeah, it made it really easier for us to be able to say anytime we wanted to add something like labyrinthine cliffs, for example, which we didn't do for this specifically purpose, but if we had wanted to, we could have created, one of those, just turned on one of those surrogates and said, hey, we're going to pop over there using this new gate. So it's just a kind of a future building space for us to be able to have. If any content that we built was going to remain permanent in the world, and we wanted in a surrogate there, it was a space for us to be able to just build out without having to come out at the city and be like, well, we need a new surrogate. Where are we going to put it? Having a sort of pre-planned sort of space for that was just a way for us to be able to have that. So that was what the purpose of that was.
Yeah. Alucard says, were there more buildings planned for the city than what we've seen in the game? No, I mean, I think we were pretty much just filling space with interesting experiences. So it wasn't like we had this giant design document and we just were finding places. It was like, here's an interesting place. What can we do with this that will make it fun to go explore this area? So.
Yeah, it was a lot of back and forth between the two of us and other designers and other artists on the team of we would get a prop and be like, oh, this is really cool. Where can we put this? Is there room for it? I mean, the Trader Vic's, I think, was one of those examples where it was like, we definitely, if we're going to have this great view of this, I was like, we've got to have, a beachside bar where, there's the little tiki glasses with the umbrellas and stuff. It's like, it just, one of those
well, that's actually an example of where we wanted a different flavor than what was in the rest of the place and didn't really have prop support or whatever to do that. I mean, I literally took a coconut prop that we had and made an umbrella and stuck it in and got that prop in just so you could, and I took one of the giant lions that you see up on the giant pillar cliffs and sunk it into the ground so you just see its face and wreathed it with palm fronds to kind of give it a tiki feel, so it's like you got to get really creative with the tools on hand to get those different flavors in there.
Yeah. Question from Derzilla. Why was the eastern section of the city so barren of buildings and people? That isn't really any great mystery. I think we really just wanted it to be sort of, again, potential future expansion space in terms of the city expanding out and growing into something beyond what we wanted to have at launch. So if we were going to have new content that we were going to put into Lion's Arch, we had a space to put it.
And also just having another flavor, a rural kind of flavor on the outskirts of town. I thought that was neat.
Yeah,